Four, two, one. Hi, everybody. It looks like we're live. Welcome to the broadcast. This is going to be big, big, big. We've talked to Judith Kalaora before, History at Play, and now we're going to drill down and talk about something more specific. She has a number of colleagues that portray famous women throughout history, and this iteration of it is the First Ladies Forum. So, welcome, First Ladies. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So we have Dolly Madison, Louisa Adams, Mary Lincoln, and Jacqueline Kennedy in the form of Judith Kalaora and Laura Rockland, Laura Keyes, and Leslie Goddard. So thank you very much for being with us. Who wants to tell me what you do? You can do it better than I can.
Well, let's
Judith,
go chronologically. Judith, how about you set us off?
Well, I will first of all say thank you, Bradley. And we are the First Ladies Forum. We are a group of nationally accredited historical interpreters, and we bring to life the stories of First Ladies who have incredible stories to tell. Personally, for me, Dolly Madison is someone I've been interpreting since about 2016. She is a delightful person to behold, but there are a lot of intricacies in her character that make her a very problematic historical figure. So we try to tackle both sides of that equation in terms of, not only are we bringing out the positives, but also those things that, from a contemporary standpoint can be problematic.
As actors, you make choices. And so you have a lot of say over how these people get portrayed. How do you decide which choices to make? You kind of get to decide which version of Dolly Madison is presented.
Well, I'll pass that on to someone else, because all of us within the forum have issues that, can strike up very, very difficult conversations from a contemporary perspective.
So let's go with Louisa Adams. Do you portray the worldly Louisa Adams or the bored in Massachusetts Louisa Adams?
A little of both. I mean, I'll say for me, the most important thing in any character I portray is going back to the woman's own letters and diary papers. As an introduction, of course, I always read biographies, but invariably that's someone's interpretation of this woman's words. And I want to know, what they said for themselves. So I've spent many, many hours at the Massachusetts Historical Society on the microfilm reels that are Louisa Catherine Adams papers. I think it's 264 to 267. And so I've gone through and I take Louisa in my play from, sort of the child growing up in London in the 1770s and 80s through to when John Quincy is elected to the presidency in Washington City in 1825. So I sort of run the gamut. I mean, she had an incredible lifespan from 1775 to 1852 and traveled all over the world from America to Russia. So there's an incredible amount to cover. And I try to do all of it as truthfully and as close to the way that she portrays it in her own words as possible.
This is an interesting union of women from around the country. We have a librarian and an actor from, how do you say it? Isn't that sad? Illinois or Illinois?
Illinois. The S is silent, but a lot of people outside of the Midwest, do say Illinois.
Isn't that horrible? Yes. Isn't it horrible that, here I am on the coast, not bothering to know that on my own? That's so sad.
Well, I think it's even because I struggle to spell Massachusetts, so it all evens out in the end.
Exactly. That's a fair trade. Fair trade.
Yes.
Women, how much of your lives does this take up? Is it something you do once in a while? You spend a couple hours a week on it, or is it 4 hours a day?
I'll answer first. Since I actually do have, as you say, I'm a librarian. I actually have a full-time job as a public library director. This portraying a few different women from history. This takes up at least 20 hours a week. This is a definite part-time job for me. And that's 20 hours a week of not only portrayals, but also research. And sometimes, of course, working with a wonderful group of women like this to collaborate, get new ideas or something like that. But for me, it is a definite part-time job. And so in casual conversation, I do often say to someone, oh, yes, I work two jobs.
Somebody
Yeah,
started
I
to
think
say
we all, I
something
mean, if I'll speak for one moment. I know that for many of us, Leslie and myself, this has been something that we've done for now, for her, even longer than me, for me, 16 years. But running the business of historical interpretation is particularly complex because you're wearing so many hats, right? You're wearing the hat of a researcher, you're wearing the hat of a salesperson, you're wearing the hat of a writer, a producer, a performer, and also just doing things like marketing and public relations. So we really do, when we, have created businesses out of this that have now been going on for quite a long time, you realize, and never mind the financial aspect of it. It's a huge commitment to build a business. And this is a business, just like a plumbing business or a carpentry business or any type of business. It really is.
Is it a business for all of you? You have monetized this, every one of you?
Yeah, I come from the world of museums, and I worked as a museum educator for about 15 years, working in historic houses, and got into it because someone found out that I had studied theater. I was a theater undergraduate major, and I did a master's degree in theater. But museums is really what I wanted to do. But when someone found out that I did theater, they asked me to do a portrayal of some, local woman at the museum where I was working. And what's interesting is, as soon as I did that, I had groups coming to me saying, could you do this for my senior group? Could you do this for my library? Mm-hmm. And I started out doing maybe, one or two a year, and then it was one or two a month, and then it was one or two a week. And right around, when I had been, right around 2012, I thought, I cannot do this and a full-time job. And I went to part-time work. And then 2013, I started doing this full-time, and I do anywhere from 8 to 12 presentations a week now. And it's a full-time job, which is amazing. And I pinch myself. Who would have thought you could do theater and history in this really interesting way of teaching history? It's the greatest job ever.
Folks, we are with the First Ladies Forum, a group of actors who I thought you did it together, but you have not done it together. This is right. You do it individually in your locations, portray famous women. How can someone see you in action? Like right now, what information can I give them so that they can see you in action? We don't want you to leave and go away from our talk now, but right after that, is it hit this link here? Will that work?
Our formal launch is actually President's Day, so that is 2 weeks from now. I see you have two links at the bottom of the screen, so either one of those will at this point get you to us. So the First Lady and our social media handle, which is at First Ladies Forum. We will launch our website within the next 24 to 48 hours, and up until that point, you can reach all of us through our website. My website is judithkalaora.com, but that will link you to History at Play, which is the business that I operate. And Laura Rockland is also in that business. We have actually worked together. I know you say we perform separately. We've all worked together in various capacities. I first saw Leslie perform in 2015 in South Carolina. Laura auditioned for our company in 2019. I met Laura, the other Laura, through the pandemic, where we kind of got linked with each other through social media and through our virtual performances. So any of the handles or websites that you're seeing at the bottom of the screen presently will get you to us. And then formal launch is President's Day.
I think it's important for everybody to understand the high quality of you folks as actors, your extensive experience, and the detail that you make sure you include in your performances, your portrayals. I have seen 4 of them, and it's quite amazing. Can you talk a little bit about how important the costuming and the set are, and all that goes into doing that? How about Laura?
Oh, that's a good option. I think that the accuracy is incredibly important. As someone from a librarian world, my instinct is research. Let's research this and let's get it accurate. And to speak to another question that you asked about the accuracy and yet what side to portray a first lady. I work on portraying Mary Lincoln as accurately as I can, and that includes some less than flattering anecdotes and stories that I can corroborate. through more than one source, but I still include them because in my portrayal, I portray her as human. She was a human. She was not someone to either put on a lofty pedestal or to denigrate. She was a human. And I also, as do many of the ladies, focus on the accuracy of costuming. I know we joked before about possibly going through a security with, steel undergarments, which could very well happen because I take the time to wear the proper undergarments as well as outer garments, as well as props. I source either antique or quality reproduction props for all of my presentations, and that adds to the authenticity. Of course, giving a presentation in person, someone is able to see those. Someone, in many cases, they're able to pick them up, and it's not made of plastic, and it's not something rubber band together. It is an accurate piece of whatever they're holding.
I think Laura is actually pointing out one time when I went to the Massachusetts State House and I was dressed as an 18th century woman, and I had these large panniers, they're essentially baskets. The French word is baskets, is panniers. And I walked right through and I couldn't fit through the metal detector. And the Massachusetts State House security was like, "Oh, you're fine. Just come right on through." And I was like, what could I be hiding in these panniers? Like, they're huge. Like, my width is 3.5 feet with this on. So you get away with a lot when you're dressed as an 18th century damsel, so to speak.
Yeah.
When I watch history programs, they don't include how different life was, the things that we take for granted, running water, the toilet. When you do your research, are you shocked at when you realize, my God, things were tough then? The stuff we take for granted, like heat, large part of the day was chopping, going and getting wood. Yeah. Are there any other things that impressed you when you did your research about how different life was at the time? Information you came on kind of incidentally and went, whoa, that must have been rough. Anybody?
I mean, one thing we were talking a little bit earlier about sort of the culture shock Louisa Adams had when she first arrived in Massachusetts, having been brought up between London and Paris, and sort of discovered that she had been brought up essentially to be a diplomat or politician's wife. And she spoke several languages. She played the harp. She sang beautifully. But suddenly she arrived in the farm in Quincy and was expected to milk the cows and help churn the butter and do all of these things for which she had no training and no skills. And so she'd been feeling very useful and accomplished as John Quincy's wife, and then got to Massachusetts and realized, I have to do everything from scratch here, and I am not able to. And it was a sort of a shock to feel useless for the first time in her life.
And when you really think about what each of those tasks entails, milking the cows in the abstract doesn't seem that bad. But the reality is you have to go out in the freezing cold, break the ice and milk the cows. And it was pretty brutal.
And churning butter takes upper body strength. Having done it.
Yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And how about the woman factor? I mean, the people you portray generally are not average. That's why they're famous. Like,
I would, and I want Leslie to also chime in because I feel I have not given her enough chance, but I want to just say that these women are in many ways more average than we give them credit for. For example, Dolly Madison's father moved the family to Philadelphia in the hopes of really being accepted by the Quaker Society. And in order at that time to be accepted by the City of Brotherly Love, you were required to emancipate or manumit your enslaved peoples. And when he did that, his starch business actually completely failed because there was no more free labor for that company to thrive. And her father went into depression and never left his bed for 3 years. And it forced her mother to actually open up a boarding house in a wing of their home. And they really had to dig down deep, pull up their, so to speak, bootstraps, and make a life for themselves as women without a male caretaker or financial breadwinner. And that is incredibly unusual and inspiring, and also horrific for that time period where you really have nothing to back yourself up and you just got to go it alone. And I think that's what speaks to the woman question, is that these women all sort of defied what was expected of them in a normal traditional female role and had to find a way to make it on their own.
COVID's been bad for. Sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that I really love about the fact that we're doing this as a forum, that we're offering groups, here's a series of 4 one-hour virtual performances. 2 things that I love about what we're doing. Number one, all of us have a lot of experience, and we're all really committed to accuracy in what we do. And there's a lot of people out there who do, it's not like the law profession where there's a bar you have to pass. Really anyone who wants to can do a historical portrayal, which is part of the amazing thing about it. But sometimes it's hard for groups wanting to host programs. How do you sift out who's really committed to accuracy and to a powerful theatrical performance? And the 4 of us wanted to make it easy for groups. If you're looking for really great performers who know what they're doing, this is a great way to find us. But more than that, when you look at these 4 women, and this is what's so cool about bringing 4 different portrayals together as opposed to us doing them all individually, there's something really fascinating about the role of First Lady, because this is not an elected position. It's not in the Constitution. There's no job description. There's no pay. And yet, in many cases, these women are in positions of enormous power, and they all have to negotiate. How will they make this role fit their strengths? How will they balance home and family? And what legacy do they leave? And it's really challenging. And one thing that drew me to Jackie Kennedy, who I will be the first to say I was reluctant to take her on because people know her voice, they know her look. I don't necessarily look that much like her, but I got fascinated by the fact that so much of what we think about the Kennedy years was shaped by her. And yet she presented herself as, very much of her time as a wife and a mother first, which I think was true. And yet she often doesn't get credit for being really skillful. The whole idea of calling the Kennedy years Camelot, that was right from Jackie Kennedy. The whole notion of the Kennedy years as being about youth and glamour and supporting the best in American art, that's all from Jackie Kennedy. And she really had a real savviness about it. So anyway, that kind of the commonalities among these 4 women, and the fact that they're very different women, but they're negotiating a similar thing. I hope it's one of the great strengths of what we're doing as a group.
Has the role of First Ladies changed, or has it been pretty much the same all the way through?
Oh, goodness, it's changed. I'll throw this back to Leslie real quick. Leslie has actually done a fair amount of research into just the role of First Ladies and taught me a lot and helped me look at, how it has changed over the years, which helped me interpret Mary Lincoln a little bit easier.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating when you think about the impact of history at all on understanding our current world, because there's always lessons from the past. And with these ladies, I'm fascinated by who we remember and why. Like Dolly Madison is well remembered and highly regarded, or at least the name is well remembered. But how much do people really know about her life and her impact? And why is Louisa Adams not that well remembered, given that, John Quincy Adams was a remarkable politician, and the challenge of coming in as someone born in England, and Mary Lincoln, we have this memory of her as a shrill harpy. And if it hadn't been for Mary Lincoln, we might never have had Abraham Lincoln as a president. So it really is fascinating to think about it. And when you think about how we rank First Ladies, what we've got in this group are 2 First Ladies whose names are known, Dolly Madison and Jackie Kennedy, but their full life is not necessarily known. And we've got 2 First Ladies who I think are often either forgotten or misunderstood. So again, the reason doing it as a group is so fascinating is to pull out these common threads and to think about why we remember certain people the way that we do, you know.
It was
If someone
interesting
wants
when
to-
we were having a meeting, we were talking about the fact that if you go to the Smithsonian Museum of American History, the thing that they have to, pardon me, to highlight each presidential administration is the pieces of the China collection from the first ladies for each administration. And I thought to myself, what an unusual thing, really. It's so, in many ways, traditionally like feminine, right? The hostess. But it's also very indicative of personality and trait and what they believed was important. Like Rutherford B. Hayes' set has like oyster shells built into it and like pictures of birds. It's looking at like an Audubon book. And then some are far more traditional. It's very interesting.
How do people book you? Like if someone sees you right now and says, I want one of these folks or all of them for my organization, either in person or online, how do they book you? These connections that I'm putting up here? That's how you contact
Yes.
folks.
So one thing that's important to point out is that the First Ladies Forum is a series. So we all have our own portrayals that we have independently, but we as 4 professional interpreters have come together to create First Ladies Forum in order to bring more distinction and more understanding to these women in our history. So when you book us, you're booking a series. There are 4 virtual programs. Since we're all based all over the United States, it's not as easy for us to physically come together. And right now, virtual programs are still very, very safe and very affordable, and also much easier for us to execute from a streamlined point of view. So any of the information you see at the bottom of the screen, our social medias are up. Our website is going to be up very soon. The judithkalaora.com website is also a way in the time being for you to get in touch with us so we can book a series for you.
You know what pops into my head, and you folks have probably already tried this, but it seems like your quality of performance is so high and so valuable to your communities that maybe your city or town would sponsor, like the couple of you from Boston. What I picture is the city paying you to do your performances in the council chamber so tourists could book it. It can be a thing that you do when you go to Boston, is go to the council chamber and see your performances. You could do that in a similar spot in your city, in any of your cities. Have you done that already? You probably have, right? Or is that a crazy idea?
History at Play, which is my company, has been commissioned to perform for the city of Boston. We did a program for the women's suffrage celebration back in 2019 called How Long Must We Wait at Faneuil Hall in downtown Boston. So certainly those connections are there. And Bradley, if you know someone, we would love to hear about it. We'd love to touch base with them as well.
Yeah. It's
So
funny because, I live in the Chicago area, and for whatever reason, there's a really active interest in history in the Chicago area, given that it's a fairly young city, relatively speaking, certainly compared to Boston. And it's true. I have done quite a number of programs with Chicago City, especially organizations, Chicago museums and things like that. But here's the thing about virtual presentations is that the cost is much lower. If we're all doing this virtually, an organization, say in the Chicago area, could host the 4 of us at a rate that is so much more affordable than flying, the 2 of us who live in Illinois to Massachusetts or whatever. So in some ways, yes, we can do it live in person, but the virtual world, it opens up all these new opportunities. So this
Not only is it
all new.
Give you an opportunity to do it online, it seems that over the past couple of years, people have become acclimated to receiving their information and their entertainment online rather than on the TV and in the theater. So it seems that simultaneously your skills in presenting this online grow, but the willingness to receive this entertainment online has also grown. Have you found that?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
definitely have. Speaking from the joint perspective that I have as also a librarian, I have been so pleased and so fascinated by the growth of all of these virtual talks portrayals, sometimes illustrated lectures on some other topic. And I personally have enjoyed and I've learned so much by attending these, often hosted by public libraries, which are almost always free. And that's great. So I've enjoyed that very much. And to go off of what Leslie said, when we four came together, we made a conscious effort to agree to a price point that truly is very affordable, even for an average medium-sized public library. And so, given a virtual presentation, a series of virtual presentations, we want to get this message out. We want to share these stories of these women from history.
Actually, I do know someone. I know the person who runs the Norwood Library. Is that a kind of?
Oh, I know her too.
You know her?
Yeah.
It seems like what you do would be cool to do there.
Yeah. The Norwood Library is a really good option. Yeah, I can touch base with them.
I have a business questions. I note that Judith, anyway, your History at Play is LLC, a limited liability corporation. You do that so you don't have personal liability in case of lawsuit, right? What would your liability be?
Yeah, so when we have in-person programming, it became especially obvious that there was a potential for folks in certain non-traditional venues. So we don't always perform in theaters, as Laura Keys mentioned. Sometimes we're in libraries, sometimes we're in government buildings. So there's not always a traditional stage area.
Mm-hmm.
And that means oftentimes the audience will be able to interact with us directly on our playing space, directly on our stage area. So that means there's always a potential for someone to come onto the stage and trip on something that's part of the set. There's always a potential for someone to pick something up that's old and antique and then break it and cut themselves. There is always a potential for something to happen, especially in some of our programming that requires audience interaction. Like when we're in schools, we have some students come up on stage and we give them tricorn hats to wear depending on the programming. And, we spray those hats down with lice spray because you never know, but there's always a potential. I've been in this business long enough to know that it's more important to protect our guests and by doing so protect ourselves. And that was my choice for going into an LLC arrangement.
Hold on, let's see. Let's take just a question. Do you ever get together and cross historical timeframes? By Will Lyons. I'm not sure what that actually means. Do you? Do you have a handle on that?
You know what? Yeah, we have. I can answer that for me and Laura Keys. Laura Keys and I did occasionally, we wrote a play a while ago where the two of us actually in person are together in imagined meeting between Mrs. Lincoln and Mrs. Kennedy, where, they're sort of at the Smithsonian Institution and, it's modern day. And it was a real challenge because what we usually do is it's a historical moment in time. When I do Jackie Kennedy, it's usually 1965 and she's trying to figure out what to do. So that was a really big challenge, as they're ghosts essentially in a museum. But it did open up, and this is what's so amazing about theater and history. It opened up a way for Mrs. Lincoln and Mrs. Kennedy to talk about things that you might never have thought about. Mrs. Lincoln and Mrs. Kennedy both lost a child when they were in the White House. Jackie had been pregnant and lost her baby. They both witnessed their husband's assassination. There are more commonalities between the two of them than you might realize, and incredible differences. Mrs. Lincoln was enormously political and had a really hard time in the White House when she was shut off from her husband. Jackie Kennedy was not terribly interested in politics and yet was closer to her husband in the White House than any time before because it was the time when she was most valuable to him in terms of shaping public image of the presidency and things like that. So crossing timeframes, historical timeframes that way does open up new things. But it's not that different, is it really, from like me doing Jackie Kennedy in 1965 when suddenly I can talk about, you remember Jackie Kennedy and you might know, her pillbox hat. When I put this on, people know who I am, right? But how many people realize that she was the one who shaped the entire funeral procession for JFK. She was very, very instrumental in crafting a funeral that exactly resembled Abraham Lincoln's. And she specifically wanted JFK to be remembered in a certain very, very high kind of incredibly important way. And we do, in large part, remember his presidency the way she crafted it. But we don't often think of her in that way. So, crossing historical timeframes, it really does help us understand history and how history gets written.
One thing that at least some first ladies have to deal with is infidelity. And they have to decide, how am I going to deal with this? We know of two, obviously,
Yeah.
probably Jackie and obviously Hillary. Is infidelity a thing? Has it been all the way through the history of first ladies? And has the way they dealt with it been consistent or not?
It's so interesting. I'm gonna tackle this one quickly. Very unusual situation when it comes to Dolly Madison, or as they called her, the Presidentess. Dolly and James have no children of their own, similarly to Martha Washington and George Washington having no biological children of their own. But Dolly does have children from a prior marriage. The gentleman and one of her children died from the yellow fever epidemic, one of them in Philadelphia. There were multiple yellow fever epidemics in Philadelphia. So she actually becomes known for being sort of the prime networker, the prime connector between her husband and his potential foes. And often those foes would become frenemies or alliances. And the reason that she gets a lot of bad press is because they actually called her and her sisters the Merry Wives of Washington, because they were so, as society politically saw them, coquettish, flirtatious, too extroverted. So in the manner that they said that Dolly Madison oversexed James Madison to the point where he was sterile and incapable of producing biological children. And it's just so interesting that this woman who went out of her way to create incredible alliances through her social skills and her natural enthusiasm and just gregarious personality gets this horrific slander in the press of being a woman who oversexes men. So almost the opposite of what some first ladies have to deal with.
What kind of choices did you make when it comes to Jackie and how she dealt with infidelity?
It's one of the challenges of a historical portrayal, because Jackie's approach, and there's a lot of historical evidence that she knew maybe not the full extent of what JFK was doing, but there's no question she knew what was going on. She took a very deliberate stance of don't ask, don't tell. Not don't tell, but don't ask. And we know she would do things like make it very, very clear, I am coming back to the White House on such and such a date at such and such a time, clearly signaling, make sure any other women are gone when I return. And I think for Jackie, in a lot of ways, it was she was willing to put up with a certain amount of that in exchange, as long as it did not publicly humiliate, in exchange for her being able to do a lot of things she wanted to do, which was to be away from the White House as often as she could, go away, go to the horse country, things like that. And it speaks, I think, to the idea of first ladies as kind of, they are kind of looked up to as role models in the country. And I think there were a lot of American women at the time who did make that choice, of a similar kind of choice. And in Jackie's case, her father was, she adored her father, and her parents divorced young, which was very traumatic for her. And I think she saw that as something that a woman has to put up with to a certain extent. The question, of course, is, to what extent do we as a society, do we live in a world today where that is the kind of role model we want to have? And the change over time. I mean, I don't think we know the full extent of, what presidents were doing, but I think a lot of American women have had to make the decision. And, you see it in Hamilton, right? I mean, if anyone saw the musical Hamilton, Eliza Hamilton had to make the decision. Does she stay with her husband when news of this affair comes out, in which case it could ruin his political career? Or does she stay knowing that there's going to be a personal cost? And this is something that's been true throughout American history, and seeing how different first ladies have grappled with it, I think is an important way to understand that this is not black and white. You know, there's choices that you make, and it has consequences. And in first ladies, it has some big consequences.
So was there only one president that didn't have a wife? Buchanan? Did everyone
Jefferson.
else?
And
Jefferson.
Van Buren, his
There,
wife.
yeah, there were a number of widowers.
Yeah, a number of
Yeah.
widows.
Chester
That is-
Arthur.
Rudolph has a question here. Was there ever a time we didn't have a first lady? I mean, that of course is related to that.
Well, each
Did
of
we
those
already answer that?
Well, each of those men that were just mentioned, they all had a hostess of some kind because, again, the role of first lady was so important that the president needed a woman next to him to make all of the social connections and be the hostess. The man could not do it on his own, and so each of those men that were just mentioned, they all had a first lady to assist them. Obviously, not their wife.
One of my favorite
Go
things.
Laura. Yep.
No, and this may be what you were about to say, so feel free to stop me. But one of my favorite things I've ever seen in an archive was an invitation that Thomas Jefferson wrote one evening, begging Mrs. Madison and Miss Cutts to come to the White House and help him deal with female visitors expected. And I just love that note of desperation that Jefferson has no official first lady. So please, Mrs. Madison, help me. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, Dolly Madison has a lot of experience because not only is she first lady for President Madison, but she's also serving when Thomas Jefferson's daughter is unavailable. She's serving as his first lady. And there's this very interesting arrangement that Thomas Jefferson comes up with that really conflicts normal etiquette. So he called it pell-mell, which was kind of like you willy-nilly can do whatever you want in a dinner setting, and you can change the rules from what was standardized from French and European culture. But that only happens after they have this fiasco where a foreign dignitary from England named Mary, it was called the Mary Affair, comes, and they very specifically don't line up a man with a woman to escort them properly to the dinner table. And Thomas Jefferson ends up taking Dolly Madison instead of taking Mary's wife. And it really, really messed everything up. And some say that Jefferson did this on purpose as a very directed insult to, at that time, our still rivals and very tenuous relationship that we had with the British Empire. But like, without a woman on your arm, as Laura mentioned, you can't have a formal dinner affair. You can't have a state dinner without women. And it was specific how you walked them into the dining room.
Right. I could talk to you longer, but we've been going almost 40 minutes. So I don't want to overdo it. I'll tell you one thing. I'm jealous of you women. You know why? Because I'm kind of all alone, and you seem to have this crew of like-minded people that you can hang around with online and later in person. I picture you pouring a glass of wine sometimes and having hanging out online, and I hope you do that.
Well, we actually do. Do you mind if I'm going to just sort of plug one other thing where you can get to know us on a more casual basis? History at Play does have a mingle every month where these folks who are in the First Ladies Forum, along with other historical interpreters from all over the United States and folks who love the type of work we do,
when
come together. So I'm going to add that. That's actually on our History at Play Facebook page, but we'll add that to our website as well. It's called The Mingle. This February's Mingle is February 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll make sure to put that on our social media as well as our website, so folks can come who are interested in learning
Eastern
more.
time. We were talking about time zones before you came on, and how the people that are not in Eastern have to think about time zones all the time. We don't have to think about that. Thank you so much. What a wonderful experience it was being with you today. Thank you.
Thanks
You're
for having
welcome.
us.
Thank you.
Bradley. It was a pleasure.
So if you want to get in contact with these folks, I hope you've been taking down this information. There's this one here. You can Google. Can you Google First Ladies Forum yet?
We're very new. We're very new.
Okay.
So because our formal launch is President's Day, I would specifically reach us through the handles or the websites.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and hope we can talk to you all again soon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye.